I still remember the first time I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the parking lot, barefoot, sobbing, with blood running down her arm. And I just froze. I didn't know her. I had never seen her before. But something in her eyes pulled me in. It wasn't just pain. It was betrayal. Deep, raw, soul-ripping betrayal. I had no idea that helping her that day would cost me everything. My job. My fiancé. My family. But I'd do it again. My name is Vanessa. I'm 33, I work in corporate marketing, and up until last year, my life was a perfectly controlled little bubble in Austin, Texas. Comfortable. Safe. Predictable. And then Amina walked in and blew it all to hell. We met on a Wednesday. I had just finished a late shift at work and was heading to my car when I saw her, the woman in the parking lot. She looked like she didn't belong there. Long black dress, gold bangles on her wrists, thick dark curls stuck to her face with sweat. She looked like she had stepped out of a different world. I ran to her. "Hey, are you okay?" She looked up at me with these wild, terrified eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Don't call anyone." That was the first red flag. But I ignored it. I helped her into my car. She was shaking so hard I thought she'd pass out. I offered to drive her to the ER, but she grabbed my arm. "No hospitals. Please. Just somewhere safe." She had a slight accent, Middle Eastern, maybe? But her English was perfect. Clipped. Sharp. Educated. Something told me this wasn't just some random runaway. Still, I drove her home. To my little apartment. I let a complete stranger into my house. Because something in me, something stupid and naive, trusted her. She didn't say much that night. I gave her clothes. She showered. I bandaged her cut. And when she finally slept, curled up on my couch like a stray cat, I just sat there watching her. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The next morning, she was gone. No note. No name. Nothing. I thought that was the end of it. A weird story to tell over brunch. A mystery I'd never solve. But 3 days later, she showed up at my office. This time, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, sunglasses over her face. She looked normal. But when she pulled off her glasses, I saw it. A fresh bruise under her eye. She handed me a coffee. And a folded paper napkin. On it, in the neatest handwriting I've ever seen, was a single line. "You saved my life. Now let me save yours." I should have run then. But I didn't. I smiled like an idiot and said, "Okay." That's how our friendship started. And that's how my life began to fall apart. I didn't know what she meant when she said she wanted to save my life. Honestly, I didn't think too hard about it. I was just curious. And maybe a little enchanted. There was something magnetic about Amina. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the weight behind her silences. She didn't try to impress me. She didn't overshare or smile too much like everyone else did. She just existed fully, unapologetically, like a storm that didn't care who it soaked. And I, like a fool, stood in the rain without an umbrella. We started meeting after work. First for coffee. Then walks. Then late-night drives with music turned up so loud it drowned our thoughts. She never talked about where she was from or what had happened that night I found her. But I started to piece it together. She'd flinch at sudden noises. She kept her phone off. She once panicked when we passed a group of men in a restaurant, her hand gripping mine so hard it left marks. I didn't ask questions. I just let her be. One night, sitting in my car outside an old diner, she finally opened up. "I was supposed to be married last year," she said, staring at her reflection in the window. "To a man my parents chose." I said no. So they locked me in my room for 2 weeks. Took my passport. Smashed my phone. I didn't breathe. She turned to me, her eyes unreadable. I escaped. Climbed down a fire escape in the middle of the night. I had nothing. No ID. No money. Just a friend's name and the hope she'd hide me. She didn't. I wanted to scream. To cry. But I stayed quiet. Amina smiled bitterly. "You were the one who helped me. A complete stranger." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in my chest cracked open. That night changed everything. We became inseparable. She moved in with me temporarily, just until I get on my feet, she said. But weeks turned into months. And I didn't mind. It was like having a mirror in the house, but one that showed me a version of myself I'd forgotten. Braver. Wilder. Free. We'd cook together at midnight, blasting music in every language. She taught me words in Arabic. I taught her how to drive in Texas traffic, which she hated. She showed me how to dance with my hands, how to tell stories with my eyes. I taught her how to curse properly in English, which she found hilarious. But not everyone was amused. My fiancé, Todd, hated her. At first, he pretended to tolerate it. "She seems intense," he'd say, smiling tight. "Kind of dark." I should have caught the red flag in his tone, but I was too busy defending her. I told him she was brilliant, brave, stronger than either of us would ever be. He didn't like that. The more time I spent with Amina, the more Todd pulled away. He said I was changing, that I was becoming someone else. And he wasn't wrong. I was. For the first time, I was thinking about my life, really thinking. Why was I in a job I hated? Why was I with a man who made me feel small? Why did I shrink myself just to keep peace? Amina never told me to leave him. She didn't have to. She just held a mirror up and let me see myself clearly. And then, everything exploded. It was a Thursday. I came home early from work and found them. Todd and Amina. Not kissing, not touching, but fighting, screaming. I stepped into the room just in time to hear Todd yell, "You're just a refugee who're trying to ruin her life." Silence. And then, I slapped him. Not Amina. Not me. Him. Because in that moment I saw everything. His fear. His jealousy. His entitlement. He couldn't control me anymore. Couldn't make me choose him over the truth. And Amina, she just stood there. Silent. Strong. He left that night. Packed his things. Told me I'd regret it. But I didn't. Not then. I had no idea what was coming next. The weeks that followed felt like falling through open air. There was no floor beneath me, but for the first time in years I didn't want one. I was flying terrified, yes, but alive. Todd was gone. My engagement was over. The diamond ring, once so heavy on my finger, now lay silent at the bottom of a drawer. I quit my job a week later. Just walked in, typed out my resignation, and left. My boss called me crazy. My coworkers looked at me like I had a breakdown. Maybe I did. Or maybe I finally woke up. Amina stood by me through it all. She didn't cheer or gloat. She just listened. She'd sit with me at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, talking softly about her favorite places in Damascus, the smell of jasmine in the spring, the way the sky looked from her childhood window before everything turned to ash. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Pages poured out of me like blood from a reopened wound. It wasn't just healing. It was resurrection. We lived like sisters. No, more than that, like exiles building a home from scraps. Two women broken by different worlds, finding wholeness in each other's scars. Our apartment became our sanctuary. Mismatched furniture, Arabic coffee bubbling on the stove, candles flickering against the stained walls. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And for a while, that was enough. Then one night, everything changed. We were out late, walking back from a little Mediterranean place Amina loved. It was drizzling. She had her hood up. I was laughing about something stupid, I don't even remember what, when suddenly she stopped cold. Two men were standing near my building. Tall, black jackets. Waiting. Amina froze. I looked at her, confused. "You okay?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. Hard. "What the hell?" I asked, but her face shut me up. She was pale, like she'd seen a ghost. Inside. Now she whispered, "Don't ask. Just move." We went to a nearby bar instead. Sat in the back. She kept glancing at the entrance like a hunted animal. Finally, she said it. "I think they found me." I didn't understand. "Who?" She looked at me and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, primal fear. My cousin works with them. He's connected. When I ran, I took something. I blinked. "What do you mean, something?" Amina hesitated. Her fingers curled around her tea glass so tight I thought it might shatter. I had to. They were using me. Grooming me for marriage. Not just for tradition. For money. For alliances. My father, he owed people things. I was leverage. I found proof. Documents. Accounts. I took them. I hid them. I stared at her, my heart slamming in my chest. "You never told me this." She looked down. "I didn't want you to get involved." "Well, too late for that," I snapped, then instantly regretted it. Her eyes filled with something sharp and quiet shame. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean it." She shook her head. "No. You're right. I should have left before it got this far." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We're in this together. Whatever you're running from, we'll face it." But I didn't know then what facing it would mean. I didn't know the price of that promise. Because that night was the last time we'd sleep under the same roof. 2 days later, Amina vanished. No note. No bag. Nothing. Just a shattered teacup on the kitchen floor and the ghost of her perfume in the hallway. I tore the apartment apart. Every drawer, every cabinet, every closet. I checked under the bed, behind the shower curtain, inside the damn refrigerator. Nothing. No clue. No goodbye. I kept calling her phone, even though I knew she never kept it on. straight to voicemail. I walked the neighborhood 3 times, retraced every step we'd taken in the last week, talked to the old woman who ran the corner store, begged her for any security footage. Nothing. It was like Amina had been erased, like she'd never existed. And the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was violent. For the first time in months, the apartment felt cold. Too quiet. Her things were still there. Her favorite scarf draped over the chair, a half-read poetry book on the couch, a lipstick tube near the sink. But she was gone. And the longer she stayed gone, the darker my thoughts became. What if they took her? What if they found her and punished her for what she knew? What if she ran to protect me, and now she was alone? Or worse, I filed a missing person report. The cop taking my statement barely concealed his disinterest. Was she a citizen? He asked, eyes narrowing. I clenched my fists. She's a person. She's missing. That should be enough. But I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Immigrant. Brown. Probably illegal. Probably trouble. They said they'd call me if anything came up. They never did. So I started digging on my own. I remembered something she once said, in passing, half asleep. If anything ever happens, find the blue door on 7th. I'd laughed at the time, thinking it was just one of her poetic metaphors. But now, it was the only lead I had. So I searched every street with a 7th in the name. North 7th, East 7th, 7th Avenue. Dozens of blocks, dozens of doors, until I found it, tucked between a boarded-up pawn shop and a psychic storefront. A tiny, cracked blue door with no number, no sign. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, until a man opened it just a sliver. Tall, beard, heavy accent, eyes sharp like broken glass. You're not supposed to be here, he said flatly. I'm looking for Amina, I said. My voice trembled. She told me to come if anything happened. His expression didn't change. She's gone. Gone where? He didn't answer. I stepped forward, desperate. Please, I'm her friend. I helped her. She lived with me for months. I just want to know if she's safe. He hesitated. Then he opened the door wider. Inside, it was dim, the air thick with incense and whispers. A group of women sat around a low table, some wearing headscarves, others not. They looked up at me with a mix of suspicion and recognition. She told us about you, one of them said. A woman in her 40s with deep lines on her face. The American. I nodded, heart pounding. Do you know where she is? The woman exchanged glances with the others. Then she said quietly, she left 2 nights ago. Said she had to finish something. That it was time. Time for what? I asked. The woman looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something that chilled me to the bone, grief. To end it, she whispered. To go back. Couldn't breathe. Amina went back to her family? No, she said. She went to face the people hunting her. I staggered backward. Alone. She didn't want to put anyone else in danger, especially not you. I felt the blood drain from my face. Where did she go? I asked, voice shaking. The woman hesitated. Then she handed me a folded piece of paper. She left this. For you. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was her handwriting. Sharp, elegant, full of soul. I can't let you burn for my fire. Thank you for giving me back my name. I love you, sister. Whatever happens next, don't look for me. Tears blurred the ink. I read it again and again, hoping the words would change. But they didn't. She was gone. And this time, maybe for good. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the kitchen floor, her letter clutched in my hand, the words echoing in my skull like sirens. Don't look for me. But how could I not? How do you just erase someone from your life? Someone who saved you, who became your mirror, your anchor, your home. I didn't know where she had gone. I didn't know what she was walking into, but I knew what kind of people she was running from. I'd seen the bruises. I'd heard the tremble in her voice when she said they. These weren't just bad people. These were people who believed they owned her. People who would rather destroy her than let her be free. And now she was going to face them. Alone. I tried to tell myself she was strong, that she'd survived worse, that she had a plan, but it felt like a lie, the kind you whisper to yourself so you don't fall apart. I kept thinking about the things she never told me, the missing pieces, the secrets between the lines, the look on her face the night we saw those men, the fear she tried to hide. I realized then how little I really knew about the world she came from. I had thought our friendship made us equals, but she had lived in a war zone, a real one. While I'd spent years fighting for approval in conference rooms and relationships that never loved me back, she had survived actual fire. I had only tasted smoke. I went back to the blue door the next day, but no one answered. It was locked. No voices. No light. The place had been wiped clean, like a dream I'd imagined. I walked the streets for hours, half hoping she'd appear in a crowd at a bus stop turning a corner. I checked hospitals, shelters, called every contact I had. Nothing. Her name didn't exist in any database. She had disappeared like a ghost. And in her absence, something inside me began to die. I tried to go back to normal, to rebuild. I got a new job, part-time copywriting at a bland tech firm. I moved into a new apartment across town, something brighter, with big windows and sterile white walls. I told myself I was healing. I was moving on. But the truth was I was hollow. I stopped writing. I stopped smiling. I'd catch myself cooking her favorite lentil soup at midnight only to dump it down the sink because I couldn't eat without her laughter in the kitchen. Her scarf stayed in my closet. Her poetry book sat on my nightstand. Every time I opened it, it fell to the same page. There are wounds time does not close. Only memory bandages them with silence. I thought maybe the silence would help me forget, but instead it made her louder. Then, 5 months later, I got the call. It was a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was female. Calm. Deliberate. Vanessa. I stood frozen. Yes. There was a pause. This is Samira. I knew Amina. Knew. Past tense. My stomach turned to ice. She wanted you to have something. Meet me. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Cafe Rialto, downtown. I tried to ask questions, but she hung up. The next morning, I showed up early. I didn't know what to expect, a letter, a goodbye gift, maybe some explanation. But what I got changed everything. Samira was already there when I arrived. She looked nothing like I imagined. Short, delicate, impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit with hair pinned back in a tight bun. She stood to greet me, extended a hand and smiled, but there was something behind her eyes. A sadness too old to be spoken. She talked about you, she said softly as we Saturday called you her miracle. I blinked hard, fighting the lump in my throat. Is she? She's alive, Samira said quickly. But not here. My heart surged. Where is she? Can I talk to her? Samira shook her head. No. She's deep undercover, working with people to take them down from the inside. She used the documents she stole. She made a deal. My mouth dropped open. She's working with the government? In a way. More like activists, private agents, human rights groups. Off the books. Dangerous. But powerful. I could barely process the words. Why didn't she tell me? She couldn't, Samira said. It would have put you in danger. You were already too close. She slid an envelope across the table. She wrote this. Months ago. Said to give it to you if she didn't come back. I stared at the envelope. My hands trembled as I reached for it. My name was written on the front. In her handwriting. A single tear fell onto the paper. She said you changed her life, Samira whispered. That she never knew freedom until she met you. I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And 3 words. You saved me. I walked home that day in a haze. The envelope pressed against my chest like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Every word Samira said spun in my mind like broken glass in a dryer, violent, loud, disorienting. Amina was alive. But she was out there in the shadows, walking into the lion's den, putting herself back in the very nightmare she'd escaped from. For what? Justice? Revenge? Redemption? I didn't know. All I knew was that she had made that choice to protect me, to keep me from burning in her fire. And I hated it. I hated how powerless I felt. How final everything sounded even though she was still breathing somewhere out there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find her and drag her back and lock the door and never let her go. But I couldn't. Because this wasn't my fight. Still, I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I tried. I went back to work. I made small talk. I went on a date with a guy from my office, nice, gentle, safe. But when he leaned in to kiss me, all I could see were Amina's eyes. That haunted softness. That quiet fire. I pulled away and mumbled some excuse, but the truth was simple. She ruined me for ordinary. She made me see the world for what it really was: brutal, unjust, beautiful. And now that I tasted that truth, I couldn't go back to pretending. So I started writing again. Not just journaling, but real writing. Long nights hunched over my laptop, telling our story. Her story. Every detail I could remember, from the first night I found her bleeding in the parking lot to the moment Samira handed me that letter. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. I cried. I screamed into pillows. But I kept going, because I knew now this was the only way I could keep her close. If I couldn't bring her back, I could at least make sure the world never forgot her. I sent the manuscript to 3 publishers. One responded. They loved it. Said it was raw, timely, urgent. They offered me a modest advance, promised to market it as a memoir about cross-cultural friendship and resilience. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted the story out there. I wanted someone, somewhere, to read her words and feel what I felt, the miracle of her presence. The ache of her loss. The book came out 6 months later. It was called The Girl with No Passport. It didn't hit any bestseller lists. But it found a pulse. Book clubs started talking. Women from refugee communities reached out. I got messages from readers in Morocco, Iran, Syria, France, Lebanon. They told me they saw themselves in Amina. That they too had escaped something. That they too had someone who saved them. One email stood out. It came from a secure, encrypted account. No name. No reply address. But the message was clear. You told it right. I'm proud of you. And I'm okay. Hey. I stared at the screen, shaking, smiling, crying. She had read it. She knew. And even though I couldn't hear her voice or hold her hand or watch her dance barefoot in the kitchen again in that moment, I felt her more clearly than ever. She wasn't just a memory. She was alive. And I was too. For the first time in over a year, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing the story didn't end in silence. Because of her, I changed everything. Because of her, I found myself. And even if we never see each other again, she will always be the one who ruined my life. So I could finally live it. Peace, as it turned out, was temporary. A kind of fragile illusion that settled over me like dust, only to be blown away the second I let my guard down. 2 months after the book came out, things had started to feel normal again. I was teaching part-time at a local community college, running creative writing workshops. People stopped asking about Amina. The emails slowed down. My phone, once buzzing with readers and distant cousins of people who swore they knew someone just like her, now sat quiet on the table beside my bed. And honestly, I welcomed the silence. I needed it. I needed space to breathe, to stop feeling like I was living inside someone else's story. I started dating again. Nothing serious. Coffee, drinks, awkward laughter, the occasional kiss that felt more like a question than a promise. And all the while, in the back of my mind, she lingered. Like the echo of a song I once danced to in a burning room. Then, on a gray Wednesday morning in February, the silence cracked. I had just gotten to my office on campus, a small, windowless space I shared with 2 adjuncts who were always working on screenplays, when I saw the envelope. No return address. No name. Just my name written in bold block letters, Vanessa R. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Grainy. Slightly blurred. Taken from a distance. But unmistakable. It was Amina. Standing on a balcony somewhere, city unknown, wearing a black headscarf and long coat, talking to a man with a shaved head and sunglasses. Her face was serious. Focused. The man was holding a small black device in his hand. A phone? A recorder? And then I saw the note beneath the photo. No greeting. No explanation. Just 6 chilling words. Do you know who she is? My blood turned to ice. I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me from the hallway, from behind a camera, from some invisible crack in the ceiling. I stuffed the photo and note back into the envelope and sat down, heart pounding. Who sent this? What did they mean? Of course I knew who she was. Didn't I? Or had I only ever known the version of her she allowed me to see? That night, I scanned the photo again, looking for clues. I searched online, reverse image, facial recognition tools, anything. Nothing. The man's face wasn't familiar. But there was a sign behind them in Arabic, partially visible. I sent it to one of my Syrian students. He replied within minutes. It says, Private Intelligence Bureau. Authorized personnel only. This is not a place people walk into casually. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What the hell was she doing there? I didn't sleep that night. I paced. Reread old messages. Reopened her letter. analyzed every word of her book inscription. You saved me. Did she mean it? Or was I just another stop on a longer, darker road she'd been walking long before we met? For the first time, doubt seeped in. Ugly. Poisonous. What if Amina wasn't just a victim? What if she had been playing me? What if the stories she told me were true but not the whole truth? And yet, I remembered her trembling hands. The bruises. The way she stared into the distance like she was still trying to escape something that lived inside her. You can't fake the kind of fear. You can't fake the way someone clings to life like it's breaking them apart. Still, the questions haunted me. Who sent the photo? Why now? And what were they trying to tell me? I kept the envelope hidden beneath my mattress. Every day I told myself I wouldn't look at it again. Every night I did. It was like staring at a wound I didn't want to admit was still bleeding. The more I stared, the more something inside me twisted. Not fear. Suspicion. Then, a week later, I got the second envelope. Same handwriting. Same no return address. This time, it contained only one thing. A USB drive. Labeled, Truth Watch Alone. I held it in my palm, my hands trembling. Whatever was on that drive. I knew it would change everything. I stared at the USB drive for hours before I finally plugged it in. My heart was racing so hard I could barely breathe. There was a storm outside, the kind that made the sky feel like it might rip open, and the wind slammed against the windows like fists trying to break through. Every instinct in my body told me not to do it. But I had to know. If there was even a chance it could tell me where Amina was, what she had become, why these envelopes were showing up out of nowhere, I had to look. I closed the blinds, locked the door, sat at my desk with shaking hands and double-clicked the only file on the drive. A video. It opened with static, then a shaky handheld shot of a dimly lit room. The image was grainy, time-stamped in the corner, February 11th, 3:12 a.m. The camera moved slowly, revealing a long table. Several people sat around it, faces blurred, deliberately distorted. But one face wasn't. Amina. She was standing at the head of the table, hands clasped in front of her, dressed all in black. No makeup. No smile. Her expression was stone. And then she spoke. I'm here because I believe in what we're doing. Because the world has looked away from the darkness too long. And if we want to cut off the head, we can't be afraid of blood. Her voice was calm. Measured. Unlike any version of her I'd ever known. She sounded official. Cold. Like someone testifying. Or leading. One of the blurred figures leaned forward. His voice was distorted, but I could still make out the words. Are you prepared to go through with it? Amina didn't blink. Yes. Even if it means casualties? Yes. Even if it means him? A pause. Then, softly, especially him. The room fell silent. Then the video cut out. I sat frozen. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers hovering over the keyboard, unable to move. What the hell had I just seen? This wasn't the Amina I knew. This wasn't the woman who danced in my kitchen, who wrote poetry about longing and jasmine and broken skies. This woman was steel. Fire. Something sharper than grief. Someone who had crossed over into a place I didn't know how to follow. But what shook me more was the final question. Even if it means him? Who was he? And why, in that moment, did I feel like she hadn't just answered the question in that room, but also the one that had been clawing at me since the envelopes started showing up? Do you know who she is? I thought I did. But now I wasn't sure. The next morning, I tried to contact Samira. No response. Her number was disconnected. The Blue Door location was abandoned again, nothing but an empty shell. Every lead I had gone. That's when I realized something terrifying. Someone was trying to pull me into a game I didn't understand. Someone who knew where she was, what she was doing, and maybe someone who wanted me to stop her. But stop her from what? That question kept me awake at night. I started seeing shadows where there were none, jumping at every knock on the door. I moved the USB to a safety deposit box downtown, bought a burner phone, stopped posting online. Something inside me was screaming, "You're being watched." And then 3 days later, I got the final envelope. No USB this time. Just another photo. It was Amina. Only this time she wasn't on a balcony. She was sitting in the back seat of a black SUV. Blindfolded. Hands tied. Her mouth covered with tape. She wasn't leading anything. She was a prisoner. And suddenly, the message behind all of this became horrifyingly clear. She didn't go back to fight them. They took her back. That final photo cracked something inside me that I didn't know could still break. I had spent so long swinging between hope and suspicion, clinging to fragments of who Amina used to be, trying to convince myself she had chosen this path, that she was some kind of secret agent, a martyr with a mission, burning through darkness by choice. But seeing her like that, bound and blindfolded, erased every comforting fantasy I'd built. She wasn't free. She wasn't fighting. She was caught. And whatever she was caught in, it was bigger, colder, and crueler than anything I could comprehend. I took the photo to the police. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a rescue mission or at least someone to take me seriously. But when I showed it to the detective at the counter, he looked at me like I was the one who needed help. "You said she left the country months ago?" he asked, flipping through my file like it was an old newspaper. "And this is the first contact since then?" I nodded. He sighed, handed the photo back, and said, "There's not much we can do unless she's officially listed as missing in the US. Or unless you have proof of her location." Proof. As if a woman blindfolded in the back of a car wasn't proof enough that something terrible was happening. I left the station shaking with rage, the kind that curdles into helplessness. No one was going to save her. Not the police. Not the government. Not the activists with encrypted emails. She was on her own. Again. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Something in me snapped into place that day. Maybe it was the guilt. Or the love. Or the years of sleepwalking through a world that let people like her vanish without consequence. I didn't care what it cost me. I didn't care if it destroyed what was left of my safe, quiet life. I owed her more than silence. So I went back through everything. Every message. Every note. Every conversation we'd ever had. I retraced our steps, combed through old texts and emails, called every contact she'd ever mentioned. I dug deeper into her past than she probably ever wanted me to. I found a name, Yusuf al-Hadi, a cousin she had once mentioned in passing, barely a breath behind a curse. "He's a ghost with a gun," she had said, eyes dark, voice bitter. "He doesn't want money. He wants control. And if he can't have it, he'll burn everything down." I searched the name online. Nothing in English. But in the Arabic press? He was everywhere. Businessman. Arms broker. Discreet political consultant. Suspected of trafficking women. Suspected of funding underground operations. Never officially tied to anything. But his name kept appearing in stories that vanished days after they were published. And in one of those stories, a grainy image of him exiting a building with two men. Behind them, in the shadow of the doorway, I saw her. Amina. Alive. I printed the article, circled the photo, and stared at it for hours. The building was in Istanbul. A private compound, rumored to be owned by Al-Hadi's philanthropic foundation. Closed to the public. Guarded. Impenetrable. I read everything I could. No one who entered without permission came back. But I didn't care. I booked a one-way ticket. Sold my car. Cashed out my savings. I told no one. I left a note for my sister, vague and apologetic. Then I boarded a plane with nothing but a backpack, a forged press pass, and the name of the man who had taken the closest thing to a sister I'd ever known. People think bravery is loud. I used to think that too. But as I sat in that plane, trembling, alone, heading toward a man who might kill me on sight, I realized something else. Bravery is knowing you're walking into fire. And walking anyway. Because if I didn't try, I'd never forgive myself. And if she was still alive, I'd bring her home. Or I wouldn't come back at all. The air in Istanbul was thick with smoke and memory. The moment I stepped off the plane, the world felt different, older, louder, haunted. Every street corner hummed with voices I didn't understand, every face was a blur of unfamiliarity, and yet somehow I felt closer to Amina than I had in months. I could almost hear her laugh in the echo of a street musician's melody, see her eyes in the gaze of a woman wrapped in deep burgundy silk, feel her heat in the wind that tangled my hair and carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and exhaust. But this wasn't a reunion. This was war. I didn't come here with a plan. I had no contacts, no backup, no clue what the hell I was doing. All I had was a printed photo of a building, a name that made people flinch when I said it too loud, and a desperate kind of hope that bordered on madness. The compound was easy to find. It sat behind tall black gates in a wealthy district, shadowed by trees and surveillance cameras with armed guards posted at every corner. From the outside, it looked like a private embassy, polished, quiet, impenetrable. It was the kind of place you didn't approach unless you belonged. And I very clearly did not. For 2 days I watched. From a cafe across the street, from alleyways, from a rented hotel balcony with binoculars I bought at a flea market. I saw men come and go, all in black cars with tinted windows. I saw shipments being brought in, crates rolled through underground entrances by silent workers. I saw lights go on and off in strange patterns, rooms that were always dark, guards who never seemed to move. And once, just once, I thought I saw her. A flash of dark hair behind a curtain on the third floor. A silhouette that matched the shape of my memory. I nearly ran across the street that instant, but something held me back. A voice in my head, sharp and low, "Don't get her killed." On the third day, I got reckless. I bribed a janitor at a supply entrance. Told him I was a journalist, which wasn't entirely a lie. Gave him $200 and my best pleading stare. He let me in. Just once. Just for 5 minutes. He said if I was still inside when his supervisor came back, I was on my own. I slipped through the back door, heart hammering so hard I couldn't hear anything else. The hallway was sterile, white walls, security cameras in every corner, the air smelled like bleach and secrets. I walked fast but tried to look like I belonged. Clipboard in hand, hoodie up, mouth shut. I made it to the elevator. Pushed the button for the third floor. The doors closed. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls, eyes wide, hair messy, lips whispering Amina's name like a prayer. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway that was eerily silent. No guards. No footsteps. Just rows of closed doors and the soft buzz of electricity overhead. I walked fast, scanning the numbers. Room 307. 309, 311. My hand was on the knob of 313 when I heard it. A voice. Behind me. Male. Cold. Lost, miss? I turned slowly. The man standing there was tall, lean, mid-40s. Impeccably dressed in a dark suit. Eyes like polished steel. He wasn't a guard. He didn't need to be. Power clung to him like a second skin. I recognized him immediately. Yusuf al-Hadi. He smiled. I've seen your picture. I didn't speak. He stepped closer, hands behind his back. She talked about you a lot. Said you were brave. American women often confuse bravery with recklessness. I clenched my fists. Where is she? Yusuf tilted his head. Why do you care? She's my friend. He laughed, soft and sharp like glass shattering in slow motion. Friendship is a privilege where she comes from. One she used up long ago. I stepped forward. Let her go. His eyes narrowed. Do you even know what she's done? I know what you've done. That wiped the smirk from his face. Before he could speak again, I made my move. I slammed my shoulder into the door of 313. It cracked open on the second hit. Alarms started blaring instantly. I dove inside, yelling her name, praying I wasn't wrong. And there she was, tied to a chair. Gagged. Bruised. Barely conscious. But alive. I ran to her. Pulled the tape from her mouth, the ropes from her wrists. She looked up at me with dazed, terrified eyes. Vanessa, she rasped. I got you, I whispered. I've got you. And behind me footsteps. Shouting. We were out of time. Everything that happened next felt like a dream drenched in gasoline. The kind where everything burns in slow motion and you're not sure if you're surviving or sinking. I grabbed Amina by the waist and dragged her toward the door as shouts erupted behind us, boots pounding, radios crackling, the shrill wail of a building-wide alarm piercing through the air like a knife. She was weak, barely able to walk, her legs buckling with every step, but she clung to me like she knew this might be her only chance. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the danger chasing us, taste it in the blood that filled my mouth from a bitten cheek, smell it in the sweat-soaked air around us. We burst into the hallway and I slammed the door behind us just as 2 guards rounded the corner. They shouted in Arabic, angry, urgent, a language sharpened by authority. I didn't wait to see if they were armed. I yanked Amina forward and bolted down the corridor, my arm locked around her waist, my heart punching through my ribs. We reached the stairwell, pushed through the heavy metal door, and began our descent, 3 flights, 2 at a time. My legs were screaming. Amina was half limp in my arms. I could hear them behind us now, boots slamming the metal stairs like a death drum. On the second floor, a door flew open and a figure stepped out in front of us. I barely had time to react. He lunged, grabbing my arm, pulling me back. I screamed, swung wildly, elbowed him in the jaw. He grunted, staggered. Amina, with what little strength she had left, launched herself at him, teeth bared like a feral animal. She bit his shoulder hard. He shouted, let go, and we ran. By the time we reached the ground floor, my lungs were collapsing. I could feel Amina slipping in my grasp. We crashed through a service exit into the back alley. The cold night air hitting our faces like a slap. A black van was parked nearby, engine running. For a split second, I thought we were too late, that it was one of theirs waiting to sweep us up. But then the door flew open and a voice shouted, "Get in!" It was the janitor, the same man I'd bribed days ago. I didn't ask questions. We dove in, and the van peeled away, tires screeching on the wet pavement. I looked out the back window and saw 3 men burst from the building, guns drawn, but it was too late. We were gone. Inside the van, it was chaos. Amina collapsed in my lap, sobbing quietly. Her fingers curled into the fabric of my jeans like a child clinging to a lifeline. The janitor, whose name I still didn't know, drove like a demon, weaving through narrow backstreets, switching off the headlights whenever we passed police checkpoints. After 20 minutes, we reached a warehouse by the docks. He pulled us inside, slammed the doors shut, and finally turned to face me. "You have no idea how lucky you are," he said in a low, shaking voice. "They were going to move her tonight. Somewhere far worse." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Why did you help me?" He looked at Amina, then back at me. "Because once someone helped my sister, and I couldn't save her. But maybe this time, I could do it right." He left us there with a phone, a bag of supplies, and strict instructions. "You have 24 hours. After that, I disappear. So do you." We hid there for the rest of the night. I bandaged Amina's wrists, gave her water, held her when the shaking wouldn't stop. She didn't speak much, just stared at me like I was a ghost. But in the early hours of dawn, she whispered one word. "Why?" I took her face in my hands, kissed her forehead, and answered with a voice thick from tears and fury. "Because I don't leave the people I love behind." Her eyes filled again, not just with tears, with something that looked like life, hope, and fire. The sun rose slow and silent over the Bosphorus, painting the warehouse in pale orange light that felt too soft for everything we had just lived through. Amina sat wrapped in an old blanket near a stack of wooden crates, her eyes fixed on the sliver of light coming through the high, broken window. She looked like someone who had returned from the dead, thinner, paler, skin stretched tight over her bones, but her spirit, it was still there, faint, flickering, buried under trauma and exhaustion, but unmistakably hers. I sat a few feet away, watching her, terrified to speak. I didn't want to break the moment. I didn't want to force her into anything before she was ready. But she turned to me first, slowly, her face unreadable. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't think you'd come." I moved closer. "I told you. I couldn't not." Amina looked down at her wrists, gently rubbing the raw skin where the ropes had bitten into her flesh. "You could have died. I didn't." She glanced at me then, and her eyes, God, her eyes, they weren't just tired. They were ash. Not the aftermath of fire, but something burned so completely that even the memory of flames was gone. "They were going to sell me," she whispered, and just like that, I couldn't breathe. Not kill, not punish, sell, like cargo, like nothing. I was just leverage. Again, tears stung my eyes. I moved beside her, pulled her into my arms. She didn't resist. Her head fell against my shoulder like it had done so many nights on my couch. Back when we were safe, back when we still believed the worst was behind us. But this wasn't safety. This was survival. And survival tasted like blood and silence and broken promises. She pulled back, just slightly, and looked up at me. "Why did you come?" she asked again. "Really?" I paused. There were so many answers. Love, guilt, rage, loyalty. But in the end, only one truth mattered. "Because I didn't know who I was anymore without you." She closed her eyes. One tear slid down her cheek. And when she opened them, the ash was still there. But beneath it, something had shifted. Something fragile, like a crack in ice. "I was going to take them down," she said. "That was the plan. I went in with proof. I had allies, people who promised to protect me. But it was all a lie. They were watching me from the start. Someone betrayed us. Someone I trusted. And then, I just disappeared." "You didn't disappear," I said. "You endured." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," I whispered. "It's supposed to remind you who the hell you are." We sat in silence for a long time after that. Just breathing. Just being. I wanted to tell her everything. about the photo, the USB, the voice messages, the creeping paranoia, the sleepless nights. But none of it mattered in that moment. All that mattered was she was here, alive, beside me. The janitor, whose real name I learned was Bilal, returned in the late afternoon. He brought us clothes, 2 fake passports, and a list of border checkpoints with the fewest guards. "You have 12 hours, he said. Then this place goes dark." I hugged him. Amina did too, even though I could feel how hard it was for her to trust again. But when she looked him in the eye and said thank you, it was the first time her voice sounded like her again. We made it across the Bulgarian border just before midnight. The car was silent. The road stretched endless and dark, lined with shadows that watched us without blinking. But I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt purpose. We crossed 3 countries in 5 days, using aliases, sleeping in hostels, moving like ghosts. She didn't speak much. Neither did I. But in the moments when she reached for my hand or rested her head on my shoulder or let herself laugh just once at a stupid joke I made, I knew we were finding our way back. Not to what we had, to something new. Something built not on survival, but on power. And by the time we reached Berlin, Amina turned to me in our tiny rented room and said, "I think it's time I told you everything." I nodded, heart pounding. Because I knew. Whatever came next would change everything. She sat across from me, cross-legged on the stiff mattress, her back straight, hands folded in her lap like she was preparing to confess to God, not just to me. The dim light from the small desk lamp cast long shadows across her face, but her eyes, they were steady now. Clearer than they'd been since the day I found her in that parking lot. It was like something had settled inside her, like she had finally stopped running, at least from herself. I waited. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I knew that what was coming would shift the foundation of everything I believed about her, and maybe even about myself. "I lied to you," she began. "Not about everything. Not the important things. But I kept things from you that could have gotten you killed." Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't defensive. She wasn't justifying. She was owning it. And that terrified me more than any denial ever could. "Remember the documents I told you I stole? The ones that proved what my father and cousin were involved in? That was true. But what I didn't say was that I wasn't just a victim in their game. I was part of it once." She looked down, the words hanging between us like smoke from a cigarette she hadn't lit. "They groomed me from the time I was 15. Not just for marriage, for obedience. For strategy. I was trained to be a diplomat, a representative, a tool. I met with men twice my age, was taught what to say, what to wear, how to smile without meaning it. I was raised to manipulate. To be charming, desirable, dangerous in a way that didn't look dangerous." She paused. I didn't speak. My mouth was dry, my hands clammy. When I turned 20, they started sending me to conferences in Europe. Fake internships. Political panels. I was never just there for networking. I was collecting names. Listening. Watching. Sometimes more than watching. Her jaw clenched. I used what I had. And I was good at it. Too good. I didn't even question it back then. I thought it was power. She looked at me then, and for the first time I saw the full weight of what she carried, not just trauma but guilt. Legacy. Chains she once wore like medals. But it wasn't power. It was poison. And I didn't realize it until I fell in love. My breath caught. "You, what?" She smiled softly, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Not with a man. With freedom. With the idea that I could belong to myself. That I could choose my future. That I wasn't born to be a weapon in a war I didn't believe in. That love, a real love, wasn't about leverage. It was about surrender. And then quieter, "That's what you gave me, Vanessa. You were the first person who looked at me and didn't want something in return. No angle. No strings. Just care. Kindness." And it broke me. Because I didn't know what to do with that. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes, but I forced them back. "You don't have to be sorry. You survived. You did what you had to do." She shook her head. "No. I did what they taught me to do. And now I have to make it right. That's why I went back. I didn't just want to run anymore. I wanted to dismantle what they built." I leaned forward, my voice hoarse. "But they caught you. They always catch you. Eventually." She reached out, took my hand. "But I'm not done. I still have everything I need. Every name. Every account. Every connection. I memorized it. They couldn't delete it from me. And now, I want to finish what I started." I stared at her, this woman I thought I knew, this woman I did know, not as a victim, not as a mystery, but as something far more terrifying and beautiful, a survivor who chose to become a sword. "You're going to expose them?" I asked. "I'm going to destroy them," she said, and the calm in her voice sent a chill down my spine. "And I want you with me." I didn't hesitate. Not because I wasn't afraid I was, but because something deep in my bones knew this wasn't just her war anymore. It was ours. We began that very night. No dramatic planning session, no speeches, no cinematic music. Just a worn-out notebook, a burner laptop, and two women sitting shoulder to shoulder in a rented room in Berlin, whispering into the darkness as if the walls had ears because we knew they might. Amina opened the notebook and began to recite from memory. Names, codes, locations, passwords, offshore accounts. I watched her transform again, not into the broken version of herself I had rescued from a warehouse, but into the sharp, focused architect of vengeance I had only glimpsed once before. Her eyes burned not with rage, but with precision. Everything she had endured had sharpened her like a blade, and now she was done waiting. She wasn't trying to escape anymore. She was building a bomb. My role wasn't to lead. I knew that. I wasn't trained, wasn't connected. But I could write. I could document. I could shape the truth in ways that made people feel it. We decided to divide the mission. She would gather and move the data. I would prepare the story, not just for media, but for leverage. Because if we were going to bring down the empire her family helped build, we needed more than proof. We needed a spotlight so blinding they couldn't hide from it. We worked in shifts. Daytime was for anonymity, errands, disguises, switching SIM cards, hopping cafes for Wi-Fi. Nighttime was for war. Amina contacted old allies, not friends, she made it clear, but enemies of her enemies. There were whispers of hackers in Prague, an activist in Athens with a hard drive full of compromat, an ex-bodyguard from Beirut who owed her a favor that apparently involved saving his sister from the very same network Amina once escaped. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The deeper we went, the more I realized I had crossed a point of no return. Somewhere around day 5, we got our first threat. An anonymous message delivered through an encrypted email. One line. No greeting. No sign-off. Just, we see you. Go home. I expected Amina to panic. She didn't even blink. She stared at the screen for 5 seconds, then deleted the message and unplugged the router. We're getting close, she said, almost smiling. The closer we got, the more I learned about the size of the operation we were up against. It wasn't just her cousin or her father. It was a network that stretched across continents, money laundering, trafficking, political manipulation. They were clean in public. Billionaires, diplomats, donors. But in the dark, they were monsters. And she had the map to every doorway they used to sneak through the world unnoticed. One night, around 3 a.m. after 12 hours of straight data transfer and editing, she looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said, "If something happens to me again, don't come for me this time." I stared at her. "Don't say that. I mean it. This time it's different. They won't keep me in a room. They'll bury me." I reached across the table, grabbed her hand, held it like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. "Then we burned them first." She nodded, and I saw it again, that fire. That impossible, beautiful fire. By the end of the second week, we had everything. Financial records, video evidence, transcripts, wiretaps, locations of safe houses. Even a confession Amina had secretly recorded from a former associate, a man who, in a drunken rage, admitted to knowing where the girls were kept. He thought she was still loyal. He had no idea he was digging his own grave. We didn't send it to the police. We knew how often they were bought. We didn't go to local media. Too easy to silence. We sent it to everyone. International agencies. Independent journalists. Human rights coalitions. The Interpol tip line. We released the story as an anonymous expose hosted on multiple sites. I wrote the narrative, Amina fact-checked every word. We paired it with proof. With photos. With names. With timestamps. Then we waited. And on the third day, the world erupted. Headlines. Arrests. Bank accounts frozen. Embassies issuing statements. And her cousin? Youssef Al-Hadi? Gone underground. His face flashed across every major news channel for 48 hours straight. Interpol declared him a fugitive. He vanished. But his empire cracked like glass. Amina watched it all unfold in silence. No joy. No gloating. Just stillness. And then finally, when it became clear we had done it, that we had cut off the head of a beast everyone was too scared to name, she turned to me, whispered, "It's over," and let out a breath I think she'd been holding for 10 years. I pulled her into my arms and held her until dawn. But deep down, I knew something she hadn't said aloud yet. It wasn't really over. Because even when you win, even when the monster dies, the scars remain. The fallout came like a slow, toxic rain. Not an explosion. Not the glorious, cinematic ending people expect when evil is exposed. Just silence and then rumbling. Rumors. Investigations. Denials from powerful men in expensive suits who swore they'd never heard of the names now burning across international news tickers. But behind the scenes, we knew what we'd done. The foundation was cracking. Politicians who had dined with monsters now scrambled to distance themselves. Charities lost funding overnight when it was discovered where the money had really gone. 12 arrests in 3 countries. 2 suicides. A leaked voicemail from a man begging his lawyer to bury her before she ruins us all. That her, we knew, was Amina, but they were already too late. We couldn't stay in Berlin. That much was clear. The moment the first arrest was made public, we became targets again, not just from those loyal to the network we'd exposed, but from opportunists, extremists, even journalists too eager to make us martyrs before we'd had a chance to live. We moved. Again. This time to Lisbon. Amina had a contact there, a former journalist who now ran a safe house for whistleblowers. He didn't ask questions. He gave us new names, new IDs, and a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the ocean, where the wind smelled like salt and the future. But settling wasn't easy. Our bodies were safe, yes, but our minds were still trapped in the war. Amina had night terrors. She'd wake up gasping, fists clenched, eyes wild like she wasn't sure which world she was in. Sometimes she'd scream in Arabic. Sometimes she'd cry so quietly it broke me in half. I never asked what she saw in those dreams. I didn't have to. I saw it in the shadows under her eyes every morning, in the way she always checked the locks twice, in the fact that she never let herself sit with her back to the door. Me? I tried to rebuild. I picked up freelance writing again. Wrote under pseudonyms. Blog posts, articles, even a short story that got published in a Portuguese magazine. But my real work was her. Holding her through the bad days. Making her tea with ginger and honey the way she liked it. Walking with her by the cliffs. Letting her speak or stay silent, whatever she needed. I didn't try to fix her. I just stayed. Because I knew. Sometimes surviving is the work. 3 weeks after the first wave of arrests, we got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. No name. But we knew exactly who it was from. You think this is justice? You have no idea what you've started. Amina folded the letter neatly and dropped it into the fireplace. Neither of us spoke. Because he was right. Justice wasn't a clean finish line. It was a war of attrition. And we had just fired the first shot. But something had changed in her. After Lisbon, she cut her hair. Short. Sharp. No more scarves. No more shadows. She stood taller. Spoke louder. Started going out on her own again. One day, she came back from the market with a small notebook and said, "I'm writing it down. All of it. From the beginning." I looked at her, stunned. "You're ready." She nodded. "No one else gets to tell my story. Not even you." And I smiled because it was the first time she'd claimed her voice not as a whisper, not as a scream, but as a choice. We spent our days quietly, building a rhythm. Cooking, walking, writing. Sometimes dancing. Sometimes arguing about whether the sea here was better than the one in Syria. She laughed more. Cried less. But she never forgot. Neither did I. One night, sitting on the balcony with glasses of wine, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish none of this had happened?" I thought for a long moment, then shook my head. "No," I said, "because I would have never known you." She looked at me then, really looked, and something passed between us that didn't need language. It wasn't romance. It wasn't friendship. It was something bigger. Something forged in fire, loss, and survival. Something only we could understand. "I don't know what we are," she whispered. "Whatever we want to be," I said. She smiled. "Then let's be free." And in that moment, with the ocean behind us and the ghosts finally quiet for once, I believed we really might be. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we tried to build something resembling a life. Not a cover. Not a strategy. A life. It wasn't glamorous. There were no sweeping declarations of joy. No magical day where all the pain just vanished. But there were little things. Soft things. Mornings when the sunlight hit the window just right. and Amina would hum some old tune from her childhood while making coffee. Afternoons where we'd sit in the tiny courtyard garden with our feet in the grass, breathing in the warmth and pretending we were just two women in love with the breeze and the silence. She started working again, remotely, translation jobs mostly, but she was also writing that book she'd promised herself she would. The one that told her truth, not the one others wanted to craft around her. I stayed close, always close. Part of me still flinched every time the doorbell rang. Part of her still jumped when a car backfired too loudly. But we were learning to live through those reflexes instead of under them. Lisbon was kind to us. Its streets were old, and in them we found a kind of peace that only history understands, the kind where the city doesn't try to erase your past, just makes space for it to exist. We weren't the only ghosts walking its alleys. There were others like us, survivors from 1,000 unnamed wars, invisible except to those who knew how to see. We found a little community there. A bookstore owned by a Moroccan woman who never asked questions. A tattoo artist from Egypt who covered Amina's old scars with delicate ink vines. A baker who kept extra fresh bread for us when we came late. They didn't need to know what we'd done. They could feel it. Something about the way we moved. The way we didn't flinch from pain. The way we carried things even when we weren't holding anything. But even paradise has shadows. One afternoon, Amina came home early. Her face was pale, her shoulders tight, the corners of her mouth pinched like she was holding something in. She handed me a folded piece of paper, a flyer, printed in cheap ink, but the image was unmistakable. Amina's face. Her real name. A reward. 25,000 euros. The flyer claimed she was wanted for questioning in connection with a terrorism investigation. We stared at it in silence. I wanted to scream. Break something. Call every journalist we'd worked with and beg them to fix it. But Amina just said, they're not going to stop, are they? I shook my head. No. You embarrassed them. You cost them power. Men like that, they don't forget. She folded the flyer carefully and slid it into the trash. They're not going to win, she said. Not with fire. Not with vengeance. With calm. With clarity. With that deep, chilling composure that made me believe her even when I didn't want to. Still, we knew we had to act. We reached out to a contact, someone from the activist network that had helped us publish the leaks. They confirmed what we feared, someone on the inside had betrayed us. The leak had come from a sympathetic government agency in Eastern Europe that had caved to pressure from a private security conglomerate, one with deep ties to the people we exposed. Amina didn't cry. She didn't panic. She packed a bag. Just the essentials, a few clothes, her laptop, the notebook, the pendant her mother gave her before everything went dark. I asked, what are we doing? She looked at me and said, we keep moving. We keep living. We stay ahead of them. And then, but this time, we fight smarter. That night, we boarded a train headed north. No goodbye party. No closure. Just another disappearing act in a life full of them. But this time, something was different. We weren't just running. We were adapting. We were evolving. I watched the lights of Lisbon fade behind us and felt a pang of grief, not for the city, but for the illusion that we could ever truly rest. I realized something then, something sharp and real. Freedom isn't stillness. It's motion. It's choosing to move every damn day even when they try to freeze you in place. And Amina? She was no longer the hunted. She was becoming something else entirely. Something they hadn't prepared for. We arrived in Oslo under the cover of gray skies and soft rain, the kind that mists your hair and settles into your skin like memory. Norway was never on our original list. It was too exposed, too orderly, too Western. But Amina had a contact there, a woman named Helle, once a political analyst, now something far more dangerous, a believer with a conscience. Helle lived alone in a high-rise apartment that overlooked the water, the kind of place that felt too clean for the kind of stories we carried in our bones. But she welcomed us without hesitation. No questions. Just 2 spare keys, a stocked fridge, and the kind of silence that said, I know what you've been through. I've seen it too. Oslo was cold, but in a different way than fear. It was the kind of cold that made you sharp, clear, focused. Amina liked it. She said the cold kept her alert, made her remember she was alive. We walked for hours through the city, trying to memorize street names, escape routes, surveillance patterns. I watched her shift again, blending into her new skin like a chameleon, but this time not out of fear. Out of purpose. There was no more pretending. No more hiding in kitchens or behind soft smiles. This version of Amina was intentional. Strategic. Dangerous in a way that made me both proud and scared. She started speaking at closed-door meetings, underground circles of journalists, activists, disillusioned diplomats. She didn't reveal her identity, but her voice, her story, her knowledge, it spread. People began quoting her anonymously in forums, using her tactics in protests, citing her as a ghost source in exposés about transnational corruption and human trafficking. She became a myth, the woman with the fireproof name. But myths are hard to protect. It started again slowly. A note slipped under our door. A man lingering too long near the cafe where Amina liked to write. An unmarked van parked across the street for 3 nights in a row. I tried to pretend it was coincidence. Oslo was safe. We had changed everything, names, habits, passwords, countries. But she knew. They found us again, she said, sipping her tea one morning without looking up. Her voice was too calm, like she'd expected this all along. I didn't argue. I just asked, what do we do? She looked at me then, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was a quiet, bitter kind of resolve. We make the next move. And that's when she told me the truth, the final piece she had never shared. Not even in Berlin. Not when I pulled her from that prison. Not in Lisbon, or on the train, or in the hours of darkness between cities. She had one last card. One last name. One man buried so deep in the heart of the machine that even the exposé hadn't touched him. He wasn't her father. He wasn't her cousin. He was the architect. The man who had trained them all. Amina had met him once. Years ago. As a teenager. He'd kissed her hand and called her a future queen. She hadn't understood then who he was. But after everything, after years of putting the puzzle together, she knew. He was the one who made her father. Who made Yusuf. Who built the system they enforced. And he was still out there. Safe. Hidden. Untouched. I can find him, she said. I know how. My blood ran cold. You want to expose him? She shook her head. No. I want to end him. I stared at her. You mean? Yes. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't rage. It was a fact. A sentence. A vow. You're not that person, I said quietly. Her eyes softened for a second, just a second. Then what am I, Vanessa? What did I survive for, if not this? I had no answer. I didn't know where justice ended and vengeance began anymore. I didn't know how to measure what she'd lost, what she'd been turned into, what she still carried inside her. I only knew that the woman in front of me was no longer asking for permission. She was deciding her own ending. And she wanted me beside her. So I nodded. Because if this was the final chapter, I had no intention of letting her write it alone. We didn't speak much over the next 48 hours. There was a quiet between us, not of tension, but of preparation, the kind of silence that comes before a storm you know can't be avoided. Amina moved like a machine, efficient, deliberate, calculating. She spent hours on her laptop, encrypting messages, tracing bank transfers, digging through data dumps and forgotten archives with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. I watched her from across the room, the glow of the screen lighting up the sharp lines of her face, and I realized something terrifying: she was no longer surviving. She was hunting. The man she was after had a name, Mikhail Vetrova. Not his birth name, of course. That had been scrubbed decades ago. But under that identity he had built a shadow empire. He wasn't on any government list. He didn't appear on sanctions rosters or in leaked documents. He lived behind proxies, behind the faces of men like Yusuf and the ones Amina had already taken down. He was the one who taught them how to vanish. How to own the world without leaving fingerprints. He was the ghost that made monsters. Amina tracked him to Zurich, a chateau on the edge of the lake surrounded by trees and private security. Officially, it was registered to an offshore holding company owned by a retired Czech philanthropist. But she found the cracks. A misfiled shipping invoice. A travel record that didn't match. A decrypted call log from a compromised phone in the Istanbul compound. She strung it all together like wire, tightening it around his neck. And then she looked at me and said, "You don't have to come." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she still didn't understand. "I'm already in this," I said. "I've been in this since the night you bled on my car seat." Her eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. We flew to Zurich under aliases again. No checked bags. No electronics we couldn't toss. Just our minds, our notebooks, and a plan we hadn't dared speak aloud. We stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by forests thick with winter fog. Every night, we watched the chateau from afar, noting shift changes, surveillance patterns, which vehicles arrived when. It was eerie how normal it looked. Like a place where a family might vacation. Where children might play. But Amina knew better. "He doesn't live with people," she said. "He uses them. Like furniture." By day 4, we had our window. A delivery van scheduled for a late-night wine shipment. 2 guards swapped out. the perimeter cameras on a maintenance cycle that left a 10-minute blind spot, and a locked cellar entrance on the north side that could be picked with the right tools. We didn't talk about what would happen if we were caught. We both knew. There would be no prison, no trial, just a quiet burial and a new name added to a long list of missing women. We slipped in under the cover of rain. Amina wore black, face uncovered, no fear in her eyes. I followed her through the trees, through the gate, through the darkness like I had always done, not blindly, but willingly. The cellar door opened on the second try. Inside, it smelled like dust and old money. We moved through the underground corridors like shadows. Every step was a risk. Every heartbeat, a countdown. And then we found him. He was sitting in a study, alone, like he'd been expecting us. A fire crackled behind him. A book in his lap. Whiskey in hand. He looked up and smiled. "Amina," he said calmly. "Took you long enough?" She didn't speak. She raised the gun, not her father's, not Yusef's, hers. And still, he didn't flinch. "Do you really think killing me will end it?" he asked, voice low, almost tender. "I built something bigger than either of us. You kill me, another takes my place. Maybe worse. Maybe smarter. You train them," she said. Her voice was steady. "Cold. You turned my family into monsters." He chuckled. "I gave them purpose. You were always the most promising." She stepped closer. "You stole my life." He leaned back. "I gave you power. And now look what you've done with it." I saw her hand tremble just once. And then she asked, almost in a whisper, "Why me?" His smile faded. "Because you were the only one who never needed to be broken." And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just revenge. This was the final severing of the leash. Amina stared him down. Then she pulled the trigger. One shot. Clean. Final. He slumped forward. No more words. No more ghosts. Just silence. And then she turned to me. "I don't feel free," she said. I stepped forward. Took her hand. "Not yet," I whispered. "But you will." We didn't run. Not this time. We walked out of that chateau like it was just another night, our footsteps steady on the gravel path, the cold Swiss air cutting against our skin like a reminder, you're still alive. Amina didn't speak, not for hours. We crossed the city in silence, boarded a night train south, ducked into a sleeper car, and curled into opposite bunks like we were strangers. I couldn't sleep. I watched her through the darkness, her back turned, her shoulders tense, as if the weight of what she'd done hadn't yet sunk in, or maybe it had, and she was just waiting to collapse under it. But she didn't collapse. She woke before me, already dressed, her hair tied back, her eyes hollow but clear. She handed me a paper cup of coffee and said, "We made it." I nodded, but I could feel the question lodged in both of our throats. Made it to what? We spent the next week off-grid, moving through small towns in the Italian countryside. We used cash. Slept in train stations. Shared meals with strangers who didn't speak our language. It felt like exile, but in a strange way also like rebirth. There was no plan anymore. No next step. The mission was over. The architect was gone. The network was splintered. The list of enemies we feared had thinned to whispers. And that's when something unexpected happened. People started reaching out. Quietly, discreetly. Journalists from South America, activists from Southeast Asia, anonymous whistleblowers from the Middle East. They'd heard rumors. They'd read between the lines. They knew who Amina really was, even if they couldn't prove it. And they didn't want her exposed, they wanted her help. It started with one encrypted message: "We're building something. We need you." At first, she refused. She wanted to be done. She wanted to rest. But one night, in a tiny room above a bakery in Florence, I found her sitting on the floor, laptop open, staring at a live video feed of a protest in Iran. Tear gas. Screaming. A woman bleeding from the head. And Amina, with tears running down her face, whispered, "It never ends, does it?" I sat beside her, took her hand. "No. But maybe it doesn't have to win." She didn't answer. But the next day she wrote back, "I'm listening." That's how it began again. Not as a crusade. Not with vengeance. But with something purer. Quieter. Purpose. We relocated to a coastal village in southern Spain, a quiet place with warm skies where the sea whispered instead of roared. We rented a modest house with cracked tiles and a lemon tree in the yard. I took on editing work for human rights publications. Amina became a silent partner in an underground digital resistance network. She didn't lead. She advised. She trained others in how to disappear, how to protect themselves, how to fight without being seen. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a teacher. And she was good. The world, of course, didn't stop. Corruption didn't end. But her name began to carry weight, not publicly but in whispers, in secure forums, in encrypted files passed hand to hand by people who needed hope. Some called her the threat. Others Althamara, Arabic for the seed. Because what she planted kept growing. And me? I stayed. Always. Not behind her. Not ahead. Beside her. One evening as we sat on the roof watching the sun bleed into the ocean, she leaned against me and said, "You saved me." I turned to her. "You saved yourself." She smiled. "But I wouldn't have known I could if you hadn't loved me first." We never defined what we were. Lovers. Friends. Soulmates. Something in between. It didn't matter. What we had was forged in fire and silence and truth. But just when we began to believe peace might last. A letter arrived. Hand-delivered. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a photo. Me. Standing outside our house. Taken 2 days before. No note. Just a line scrawled on the back in red ink. "You can't kill a system. Only people." We stared at it for a long time. And Amina said softly, "It's not over." I looked at her. "Then we go again." She didn't smile. She just reached for my hand. And held it tighter than she ever had before. We didn't run. Not this time. We stood there, the letter between us like a ticking bomb that hadn't gone off yet. I looked down at the photo again, my face caught mid-step, lips parted like I was about to say something, unaware that someone had captured me in a moment that should have been private. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message. A declaration, "We still see you." They hadn't given up. They hadn't crumbled completely. What we had taken down was just a branch, the roots were still deep, twisted, clinging to the soil of every institution that claimed to serve justice. Amina didn't panic. She didn't pace or scream or collapse the way she might have a year ago. She sat down, slowly, methodically, and pulled out her old notebook, the same one we'd carried from Berlin to Lisbon, Zurich to Oslo. The pages were worn, nearly falling apart, but she still treated them like sacred scripture. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 2 words, "New War." Then she looked up at me and said, "This time, we bring it to them." I wanted to ask what she meant, what she planned, but I already knew. Amina didn't just survive darkness, she learned how to speak its language. And now she would use it not as a weapon but as a shield for others. She had already planted seeds. The networks she advised, the whistleblowers she trained, the journalists she taught to see between the lines, they weren't isolated anymore. They were connected. And what the letter writers didn't know or had forgotten was that you can't silence a voice once it's echoed into 1,000 others. That night, she recorded a video. It wasn't flashy. No logos. No dramatic music. Just her face, lit by candlelight, voice steady and low. "My name is not important," she began. "What I've done doesn't need your praise. But what I know can save lives. I've seen what the system looks like when it takes off its tie and shows its teeth. And I'm telling you now, we are stronger than they want us to believe. The machine runs on fear. On silence. On our belief that we are alone. But we're not. We never were." She paused, eyes burning into the lens. "They're watching. Let them. Because we're watching back." She ended the video with coordinates. A time. A link to a secure network. A single line of text, "If you're ready to fight smart, join us." We didn't post it on mainstream platforms. We sent it underground like a virus designed to heal instead of infect. Within days, there were hundreds of messages. Then thousands. From students, lawyers, factory workers, teachers. People who had been hurt. Silenced. Betrayed. People with proof. With files. With names. It wasn't a rebellion. It was an evolution. And somewhere deep inside all of it we found a strange kind of peace, not in safety, but in movement. In the knowing that, this time, we weren't alone. One morning, months later, I woke to find Amina sitting on the edge of our bed, staring out the window at the lemon tree. She looked calm. "More than that hole?" I reached out, touched her back gently. "What are you thinking?" She turned to me, smiled, and said, "About legacy." I blinked. "Yours." "Ours," she corrected. "I was born into a lie. But I'll die telling the truth. Maybe that's enough." And suddenly I understood. We didn't win. Not in the way stories usually end. There was no final villain. No perfect justice. No parade. But what we had done mattered. The lives we touched, the fires we lit, they were still burning. Somewhere out there, a girl who thought she had no voice was reading Amina's words. Somewhere, a man trapped in silence was realizing he wasn't crazy, just controlled. This wasn't a story about saving the world. It was a story about refusing to let it bury you. About clawing your way out of silence. And building something louder, messier, stronger. Together. We stayed in Spain for a while. Then we moved again. And again. Always changing names. always adapting, but we never disappeared. Not really. Because now, we had become everywhere. In encrypted files, in courtroom leaks, in whispered names, and in each other. Amina, my friend, my sister, my fire. She ruined my life, and I will love her forever for it.